Hi everyone, welcome back to Grounded Haven. Today I am going to be doing a video of a bunch of easy summer meals using vegetables that we grow in our garden. I'm going to take you through the day and show you what we eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And a lot of these meals are going to feature the classics of the summer garden, things like peppers, tomatoes, and eggplant. So we're going to jump right into breakfast, which is going to be the first meal, of course. And for breakfast, we are going to be having a kind of Southwest-inspired omelet. So this one is going to have peppers and shallots, and we're going to put some pepper jack cheese in the middle. First, I'm starting off by dicing up my vegetables. I have one pepper here. This is a korbachi pepper, which is a new pepper that I have tried out this year and have really enjoyed. What I really like about these peppers is that they're kind of on the smaller side. So one pepper is just the perfect amount for an omelet for the two of us for breakfast. So I can usually just pick one of these on my way in from doing our morning chores and then dice it up for breakfast, and it just works really well. I find that the skin is a little bit thick, but since it's such a thin pepper, it's not too much of an issue, and it does have a really nice strong pepper flavor, which I like. So I really like this variety. I would definitely grow it again next year. And I'm also going to be dicing up a shallot. These are another new thing that we have grown this year that has worked out really well. I've been doing actually a lot of leeks and peppers in our omelets, but we just finished the last of our leeks, so today I'm going to be using a shallot. Any kind of like oniony allium kind of thing would do really well in this. And I'm going to fry these off in a little bit of butter with some salt and pepper until they are nice and softened. Meanwhile, I'm going to crack my eggs into a bowl. I usually use 4 eggs for the two of us, but some of these eggs were a little bit on the small side, so I'm using 5 eggs today. We'll just have an extra nice hearty breakfast. And I'm just going to scramble these up with about 1/4 teaspoon of salt and a little bit more black pepper. Once the vegetables have been frying off for a few minutes and are nice and soft, I kind of like to distribute them evenly in the pan, and then I also like to do just a light drizzle of oil around the outsides of the pan just to make extra sure that my egg doesn't stick, and then I'm just going to pour my egg mixture straight over the vegetables. I'll let that sit for a minute to start cooking on the bottom, and then what I like to do is kind of lift up those edges that have set up and tilt my pan so that any remaining raw egg mixture can get underneath and start cooking as well. This will make it a lot easier to flip later on so that you don't have a bunch of raw egg on top. And this way the bottom of your omelet doesn't get too dark either, because that raw egg mixture will kind of coat the bottom and protect your omelet from getting too crispy. I know my omelet is ready to flip when I start to see the top of it looks a little bit more like a gel rather than a liquid, just to make sure I don't make a mess everywhere. You can see it kind of almost looks like filmy on top, and this is when I will flip it. And I'll actually turn off the burner before I flip this, because any of that residual heat from the pan is enough to cook that other side. And then I will go right ahead and put my cheese on half of the omelet. I'm using pepper jack cheese here because we love a little bit of that extra spice and pepperiness. And then I'll flip the omelet in half, and again, that residual heat is enough to melt that cheese and get it all nice and gooey. I'll just cut that omelet in half with my spatula, and we will each have one piece of this, and I usually like to serve this along with some kind of toast. Today we are having some cinnamon raisin toast. This is a bread that I make myself pretty frequently. I will leave a link to the recipe I use down below. Pretty often I will also like to serve this along with a little bit of fresh fruit or maybe some cherry tomatoes sliced in half. I didn't do that today, but that's a nice little addition as well. So there is a typical breakfast for us. I am always a fan of a nice, hearty, savory breakfast, and this always hits the spot. I think all the flavors of the peppers, shallots, and the pepper jack cheese work so well together and makes a really nice omelet. Next, we're moving on to lunch, and for lunch I'm going to be making a shakshuka, and for this recipe we are using some tomatoes, an onion, a bell pepper, garlic, and some more eggs, and we're also going to be adding a bunch of spices as well. I'm going to start by chopping all of my vegetables, and for everything I'm doing kind of just like a large dice. And basically what we're making here is like a very chunky tomato and vegetable sauce with a bunch of spices in it. I think I've actually shown making this recipe before, and that's because we make it quite often. It just is a great way to use up a lot of vegetables from the garden. Everything I'm showing you here was homegrown, and the eggs came from our chickens, so they're just ingredients that we always have, and it's a great way to use them up. The pepper I'm using for this recipe is called an Ijvarski pepper, and I think I've decided this year that going forward, this is really going to be one of my main pepper plants. It's just consistently been one of my favorites over the last few years, and I grew a lot of pepper varieties this year, and this one is still one of my favorites. It is just so meaty, it has such a nice thick flesh, and the flavor is just incredible. Even when it's green, it tastes really good. Obviously it's better when it's red, but the pepper I'm showing you here, it wasn't like completely ripened. It was still a little bit green in some spots, but it still just had incredible flavor. Would definitely recommend growing this variety if you haven't tried it before. So I'm just going to continue chopping up all of my vegetables. You don't really have to be too particular about the size and shape for this recipe, which is great. And I'm going to go ahead and chop up my garlic as well. And the spices that we're going to be using in this dish are North African spices. We're going to be using paprika, cumin, and coriander. And those spices will really make this dish shine, because there are tons of recipes out there that use tomatoes and eggs in all different cultures, and I feel like the spices are really what separates all of these recipes apart. In fact, one of the other dishes that I was considering showing in this video is another tomato and egg dish. I really wanted to show a Cantonese tomato and egg stir fry, but ultimately decided on showing you the shakshuka, but maybe in another video I will show you the tomato and egg stir fry, because that's another one of my favorite tomato and egg dishes. With the same ingredients, you can always come up with different recipes from different cultures just by changing up the spices and seasonings, which I think is so cool. And it's a great way to experiment with your homegrown vegetables, because it might get boring if you just make the same thing over and over again. Maybe not, because homegrown veggies are really so good that you can eat them simply, but if you're just looking to switch things up, try and find recipes that use different spices, and that will completely change the flavor profile of a dish, even though you start with mostly the same things. And I swear this time of year we are having tomatoes and eggs in some kind of form at least like 5 times a week, and it never gets boring. So now I've got a pan and I'm heating up some extra virgin olive oil in here, and I am going to toss in my onions and peppers and just add some salt and pepper to draw out the moisture from these and fry them off for a little bit. Things are already looking so good in this pan. I love the colors of the peppers with the green and red. Kind of looks like Christmas a little bit, and I'm really happy that it is pepper season and my larger peppers are finally ready to harvest. I had been using banana peppers in this dish before, and it just doesn't quite hit the same because banana peppers have a very mild pepper flavor, and these Ijvarski peppers have a much stronger pepper flavor that works so well and adds a lot to this dish. So after those vegetables have softened for a little bit, I'm going to add my chopped garlic, and I'm also going to add 1 dried chili pepper. This is optional, but if you like a little bit of spice, it's a great addition. And now's the time that I'm also going to add the spices. So I'm going to do 1.5 teaspoons of paprika, 1 teaspoon of ground coriander, and 1/2 teaspoon of ground cumin. You can kind of play around with the ratios of those spices depending on what you like, but those are kind of just like the base spices that I like to include. And I will let those spices and the garlic fry in that oil for a little bit. This will help to bloom all of those flavors before I add in the tomatoes, because once you add the tomatoes in, they have a lot of liquid and that will start to deglaze the pan. But there are a lot of components in spices that are oil soluble, so if you just put them straight into water or liquid, you won't get the maximum flavors from those spices. So it's nice to always just like fry them off in a little bit of oil first, and then once you add some some liquid or a vegetable that has a lot of liquid in it, that will create its own sauce and that will pull more flavors from those spices. So I've added the tomatoes now, and you can see that it's already deglazing the pan. All of those brown bits are coming up from all of that moisture that the tomatoes are releasing. And as you continue to fry this, those tomatoes will really soften, and this is going to turn into a nice tomato sauce. And we're just gonna let that reduce on the heat for about 10 minutes. This will really depend on how juicy your tomatoes are, but once it gets to like a nice jammy texture, we can move on to the next step. I also wanted to mention I have made a green version of this dish with tomatillos, so if that's something that you're growing in your garden, that is a really good way to use them. It has a little bit more of a tart flavor than the tomato shakshuka does. This one is a little bit sweeter, but they're both really good, so you can kind of experiment with things that you're growing in your garden and adapt this dish to what you have. Once my sauce has reduced down a little bit, you can see how it really just looks like a chunky tomato sauce, which is what we're going for. I'm gonna make a couple of divots in my mixture and then add my eggs. I'm doing 4 eggs, so each of us will have 2, and I'm gonna crack them into those little wells that I've made in the sauce. And then I'm going to salt and pepper each of these eggs just to make sure they are nicely seasoned. And then we are going to cover this with the lid and let those eggs basically poach in this tomato sauce mixture for a few minutes until the whites are just set and the yolks are still runny. Poaching them in the liquid makes them really tender and cooks them very gently. And for this dish, I think that the runny yolks are a must because it is typically served with some sort of crusty bread or pita, and it's really nice to dip that bread into those runny yolks. So after a few minutes, I've checked on my eggs and they look really good now, so I'm gonna pull them off, making sure that each serving gets plenty of that tomato sauce mixture along with the eggs, because that mixture is also really great to dip your bread into. I'm going to top each of these dishes with some freshly chopped parsley just for a nice little pop of color. And typically this is served with pita bread. I think that's the most traditional pairing with this. A crusty sourdough would also be nice, but I actually had naan from another meal that I had made earlier that week, so that's what I'm going to be serving this with. And really any kind of bread is great with this, and you can dip your bread into the yolk or dip it into the tomato sauce mixture. It has so much flavor from those spices and those peppers and tomatoes, which have been perfectly vine ripened in our garden, so this is just like the maximum flavor you are ever going to get. This is pretty classically served as a brunch dish in the Middle East, the Mediterranean. As someone who eats eggs for pretty much every meal of the day, I think that this is perfect no matter what time of day you eat it. For a nice treat in the afternoon, I am cutting open this honeydew that we just harvested. We only were able to grow 1 honeydew this year. We grew several cantaloupes as well, but this is the only honeydew, so I am very curious to open this baby up, and it looks really nice inside. And since I'm not much of a sweets person, for me, a perfect dessert is just some fresh fruit. And especially in the summer when it is so hot, a nice cold like watermelon or honeydew, anything like that, it just is so nice to cool you off. And it was just really fun that this honeydew was homegrown. So I'm scraping off all of those seeds. These seeds are such a nice treat for the chickens. They absolutely love seeds from any kind of like melon or gourd. And a little tip, I am using this special spoon. This is actually a grapefruit spoon. It has these ridges on the ends, and this one is like a little bit pointed as well. And this is the perfect tool for scraping out seeds in any kind of melon. I use it all the time. I don't know that these are very common, so they might be hard to find in stores. I think they're more of like an old-fashioned thing, so you might be able to find them from like a thrift store or an antique store. These ones are actually from Erin's grandma, which is really cool. So if you ever see some of these, snatch them up because they are a great tool. I use them all the time for things like this. And then I'm just gonna cut up this entire honeydew, and we can snack on it for the afternoon and throughout the week. Probably serve it with my omelet tomorrow morning, since this will be all cut up and easy to serve. And I think I did end up picking this honeydew just a little bit underdone. It was a little bit like crisper and could have been a little sweeter. It was still really good, but melons are just one of those things that I am still learning when to pick them. It's a little bit hard to tell because you can't see what's going on inside, so I feel like I always pick them a little bit too early because I am worried that they will like split or start rotting. But either way, it was really nice and refreshing, and it's just really fun that it was homegrown. I feel like everything tastes better when it's homegrown anyway. The central air in our house is still broken, so we have just been trying every day not to melt, and this cold fresh fruit was a really welcome addition this week. For dinner, I am going to be making a cucumber dish as well as an eggplant dish. We are going to start off with the cucumbers, and this dish is one of my favorites. It is called smashed cucumbers, and as you may be able to tell from the title, we are going to be doing some smashing. So I have one long cucumber, and I cover it with a towel so that the seeds don't fly everywhere, and I just get to smashing. I'm using a rolling pin here. This is a great meal to make when you have a little bit of pent-up frustration or aggression, and once that is all nicely smashed up, I'm just going to start ripping this into bite-sized pieces with my hands. I don't like to use a knife here because I really like that hand-torn look, and the texture also contributes to the final dish. There are a couple of reasons why we smash this instead of cutting it. First is that it really helps to break down those cells in the cucumber, and this allows it to release a lot of its natural water since cucumbers do have a lot of water, and we don't want our final dish to be too watery. And the other reason is because by smashing it and ripping it into pieces, you form all of these like kind of craggy pieces where the dressing that we're going to make later can really cling to the cucumber, so you get really nice flavor. Next, I'm going to thinly slice up an onion. You can use a red, or yellow, white onion, doesn't really matter. We're going to add this to the bowl with the cucumbers. And then I'm going to add a teaspoon of salt to the bowl and mix it around with the vegetables. The salt is going to further draw out more moisture from the vegetables, and I'm just going to set this aside in the fridge for about 10 minutes while I get all of the ingredients prepped for the rest of the meal. And I always like to do this step first while I prepare other things because this gives the cucumbers and the onions time to sit with the salt in order to get a lot of that water out. Next, I'm going to start cutting up my eggplant for my eggplant dish. I have 3 long Asian eggplants here. Sorry, I don't know the variety name. I am going to be cutting these up into kind of like baton-like pieces. And the dish we're going to be making is called salt and pepper eggplant. I kind of made this dish up. I don't think I've ever seen it at a restaurant, and I didn't eat this growing up, but it is based on the flavors of other classic Chinese dishes, specifically salt and pepper pork or salt and pepper squid. These are things that my family always ordered whenever we did like a large family gathering at a Chinese restaurant, and it was just one of our favorites. So for the usual dishes, you usually have something that's deep fried, whether it's pork chops, squid, shrimp, or tofu. But today I'm going to be doing kind of like a stir-fry version of it because I don't typically like to deep fry things a lot at home, especially not meat. It's just like too much of a mess for me. So I'm going to be doing a vegetarian version, and I thought the eggplant would be perfect to use for this because eggplant has that kind of like meaty texture and flavor almost. I got the idea for this dish after watching a video from another creator on YouTube, and their channel does a lot of really good Chinese cooking videos. They did a video where they did salt and pepper deep fried tofu, and I've made that quite a few times and it's been so good. So I will link their video down below just so you have some more ideas of other dishes with a similar flavor. After my eggplant is all cut up, I am next going to mince up a few large cloves of garlic. I have 3 very large cloves here. I'm going to use 2 of them for the eggplant dish and 1 of them for the cucumbers. So I'll just smash and mince them up all at the same time and then separate it between 2 dishes. Next, I'm going to slice up one chili pepper. I'm using a red one. You can use red or green and whatever variety you want. I am using a Korean chili pepper here, or you can leave it out if you don't like really spicy food. And this is going to be added to the bowl that has the garlic for the eggplant dish. Everything is pretty much all chopped, and we're just going to finish up the dressing for the cucumber salad now. In my bowl with the 1 clove of garlic, I am adding a teaspoon of sugar, and then I'm going to add a teaspoon of rice vinegar, 2 teaspoons of soy sauce, a teaspoon of sesame oil, and a teaspoon of gochugaru, which is dried Korean red chili flakes. These have a little bit of a spice, but they're really not too spicy. They're kind of like mild to medium. So even though this looks like it's a lot of chili flakes, it is really not too bad. This dressing is really the perfect mix of ingredients because it's salty, sweet, spicy, sour, and it is just going to be a perfect pairing with those cool, crisp, mild cucumbers. So that's it for the cucumber dressing, and the very last thing we need to do is put together the seasoning mix for the salt and pepper eggplant. I'm starting off with a half teaspoon of salt, a quarter teaspoon of garlic powder, and a quarter teaspoon of white pepper. And that's all there is to it. I never thought that the seasoning was as simple as this, and you can put this mix of spices on pretty much anything to make salt and pepper whatever you want. That white pepper is really the key here. It surprisingly gives a really good amount of spice to the dish. I don't really think you can use black pepper. It just has a very different flavor from white pepper. So if you're looking for that like authentic salt and pepper flavor, go find yourself some white pepper, and then you'll be putting this seasoning mix on everything. Now that the cucumbers have been sitting for a few minutes, they've released a lot of water, so I'm gonna pour off all of that excess water. And you can see how much comes out of those vegetables, and if we skipped this salting step or just left that water in here, it would be a big puddle by the time we add the dressing. So I'm just going to drain off that water, and then I'm going to mix in that dressing that we made, mix everything together, and that is it for this really easy, delicious smashed cucumber salad that is the perfect summer side dish. I'm going to stick this in the fridge to stay cool and marinate while we cook up the eggplant next. So I've placed all of my eggplant into a frying pan, and I'm adding some oil and some salt. Normally I would preheat my pan, but I am going to be cooking this on my side burner of our grill outside. So I just wanted like one fewer bowl to bring out. So I just combined everything in my frying pan, and I'll just keep it a little bit simpler today. And then I'm just going to fry off this eggplant for a few minutes until it is almost completely softened through, but still just a little bit firm. Once the eggplant is almost done cooking, I'm going to add my bowl that has the chopped garlic and the chili peppers. I like to wait towards the end to add this in because if you add it too early, the garlic can burn, and I will just fry this off for a few more minutes to release those flavors from the pepper and the garlic. Then I'm going to turn off the heat, and now I'm going to add in that seasoning mix that we made that has the salt, garlic powder, and white pepper. And we're just going to mix that to coat all of the eggplant. And that is it for the salt and pepper eggplant dish. I really like making dinners like this where I'm making a few different side dishes where each dish highlights 1 or 2 ingredients, and that way everything isn't just like mixed all together in one dish. You really get to enjoy the flavors and texture of each thing on its own. And since it's a Chinese meal, we're of course going to serve this family style, so everyone gets a little bit of rice. You can choose a little bit of your side dishes, and I also had a little bit of egg drop soup that I had made earlier that week, so we each had a little bowl of that as well. So those are a few dishes that we have been enjoying from our summer garden. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you try any of these recipes out, and I will see you again in the next video.